So the final part of our forum focuses on the newly released 2024 Transmission Annual Planning Report. To take us through the highlights, I'd like to introduce Stuart Bell, who is Executive General Manager of Network and Business Development at Powerlink. Stuart could be out celebrating that his son just graduated from Year 12 this morning, but he's chosen instead to spend the afternoon with us. So you're getting the theme about how dedicated Powerlink people are. Stuart's responsible for the teams in Powerlink who bring our future network planning to life, including the huge amount of work that goes into putting our TAPA together each year. As Paul mentioned earlier, we've heard loud and clear that you want to know more about our forward planning, so we hope this presentation provides that overview. I'd like to now invite Stuart to the stage to present on key elements of the 2024 Powerlink TAPA.
Today is a great day, a momentous day. My job is done. There you go. There's my son, Ryan. So my youngest has just graduated this morning from school. My job as a parent is now complete. So I can now focus all my attention on the energy transformation. Don't think so? Oh, a bit more to go. So I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners on which we gather here today and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and also acknowledge their connection to country and watch our 150 substations and over 10,000 kilometres of transmission line crosses. Disclaimer, so this afternoon I'll be guiding the market, not guaranteeing the market. And this is what I'm going to talk about this afternoon. But before I do that, some very important information. So, Natasha, happy birthday. I hear you were keeping it a secret. So, excellent, happy birthday. And I would also like to just say a big thank you to the Powerlink team who put together the Transmission Annual Plan Report this year. A huge effort from right across the teams at Powerlink, and it gets bigger and bigger and more complex every year, and they did a great job, so I just want to say thank you very much. So, the demand forecast. So, let's get started. So, maximum demand, so it's really made up of residential demand, commercial demand, and large industrial. And on the slide here, I've got the demand in southeast Queensland, and that's really residential and the commercial. So the green line shows the transmission delivered demand over the last 10 years. And you can see that's been growing at about 2.6% per annum. The orange line, that's the actual demand that's being met by transmission and rooftop solar. So you can see that's been going at quite a steady click over the last 10 years at 4.3% per annum. And you can see then the benefit that we've been getting from the rooftop solar to dampening that maximum demand effect. So this is the maximum demand day back in January this year. The green line again is the delivered transmission demand. The orange is the demand from transmission plus rooftop solar. So you can really see the benefits that rooftop solar is helping to keep that demand down, especially during the afternoon. And then you can see the demand from the transmission network is now drifting to that late afternoon, early evening. So what does that look like in 2034? So the green line is the 2024 maximum demand. The blue line is our forecast for 2034. And that's about a 2% per annum increase over that evening period. You can certainly see that demand is now late afternoon and well into the evening. And you say, is that a big increase? This is southeast Queensland. Is that a big increase or not? And what do we have to do with the transmission network as a result? So there you go. So it's 4,200 megawatt hours approximately. And if we can find 4,200 megawatt hours, then we can actually bring that forecast maximum demand back down to 2024 levels. So we've actually got under construction at the moment about 2,000 megawatt hours of transmission batteries in southeast Queensland. So they're connecting at South Pine, connecting at Greenbank, and at Swanbank. So if you can perfectly orchestrate those batteries, you can pull down the maximum demand in 2034 by 650 megawatts. In fact, they're under construction now. They will be all wired up in the next 18 months. So all of a sudden, if we can get that orchestration, we can then start to pull down some of that maximum demand. Also in our forecast is 370 megawatts of EV chargers. We're forecasting about 1 million EV cars in 2034. What I'm hoping is that we'll be able to coordinate when they actually get charged, so we actually don't charge them on the evening peak of our 6 hottest days of the year, and we can charge them more in the afternoon or at lower peak times. So if we can coordinate the batteries, manage the electric vehicles, all of a sudden we are starting to pull that potential increase in demand back down to 2024 levels, and that's the challenge that we have to make sure that we don't have to build the network to meet a maximum demand that we can manage differently. So we're not expecting to do transmission into southeast Queensland. Hopefully we can trickle charge the EVs, we can trickle charge those large batteries and use them at time of peak. But note, I said into southeast Queensland. We're going to have to work very, very closely with EQL because those transmission batteries will also be flowing through into the distribution network at that time. So we'll have to work through those transmission to distribution transformers to make sure they're fit for purpose and do that joint planning into the distribution network. Another part of the demand forecast is the large industrials, and certainly seeing a lot of interest. So typically, those large industrial loads next to ports, typically in regional Queensland, and lots and lots of companies coming towards us about electrifying. They want to decarbonize their load, so we've done a number of planning studies now for some large industrial loads wanting to move to electric. Interest in manufacturing, particularly green manufacturing, lots of people wanting to connect hydrogen, both the hydrogen production and hydrogen liquefaction. And we've also got a couple of data centers, not as many as in some of the southern states, but we've also got a couple of data centers wanting to connect. So we've taken that into account into our demand forecast, and we've got 1,500 megawatts of this additional industrial load loaded into our maximum demand. In context, there's still another 10 gigawatts that we haven't put in that we're in discussions on, and when they actually reach a more definitive point, we'll be putting them into the forecast. But all of a sudden, you're starting to see the potential increases in maximum demand and in energy from people moving towards net zero and wanting to decarbonize. So when you put all those together, you get the Queensland maximum demand forecast. So the red one is the PowerLink one, and the green and the yellow is the demand forecast from AEMO's ESOO. This is the first time in about 10 years since PowerLink's done its own demand and energy forecast. Previously, we've been relying on AEMO's ESOO. But as we're seeing more people come forward and they move towards net zero and the changes that we expect to see in the demand and energy, we thought it was really important to understand that at a regional level in Queensland. So we're using our very deep connections with customers, with various stakeholders, with EQL, to make sure that we can actually understand the demand and energy forecast at a regional level, whereas AEMO's forecast is more at state level. But obviously continue to work closely with AEMO and those macro electricity trends as well. Now you see the difference. So PowerLink's demand energy forecast is a little bit higher than the AEMO one. The two main factors of that, one is the block loads that I talked about in the last slide, so that 1,500 megawatts. So that's a big difference between the PowerLink and the AEMO forecast. And similarly, we don't assume as much embedded generation in the distribution network either. So you saw in earlier slides that the maximum demand is going to be in the evening. So we're not getting much benefit from solar. I'm not seeing we're going to have a huge amount of wind in the distribution network, but we will have that batteries, and we'll have to make sure that we're taking them into account appropriately, whether it's the transmission lines into southeast Queensland or the transformers down into the distribution land. Now, demand and energy forecasting has never been more complex, and the future such different. So based on that, we've been very transparent with our assumptions in our forecast. They're on Appendix C of the TAPR. But we're also going to publish the demand and energy forecasting models on our website early next year. So if you have different assumptions, you can then use those models, put your own assumptions in, and then see what that does to the forecast. So we very much see there's a need for that transparency at this moment in time because of the uncertainty. Minimum demand. So at the other end of the spectrum, got to make sure the system is stable during minimum demand. This is a trace from October. Minimum demand got down to just over 3,000 megawatts at that time. And it's really important that we keep this network stable. So do we have the right system strength, the inertia, the frequency control to keep the system stable? Super, super important. So where are the stability limits? So the first one there, the dotted line, that's the N-2. That's when we start to get nervous. If two things go wrong, either from a generation, from a transmission, or from a load perspective, all of a sudden the system will become unstable. That's at 3,000 megawatts. So that's basically where we were in October this year. Then it's a white knuckle ride for those in operations. I'm looking at you, James. Really between that kind of N-1 to N-2. And the N-1's that red, and it's a bit fuzzy, because it really depends on what we're doing with exports to New South Wales. If we are exporting to New South Wales, we've got more flexibility because we have a bit more generation online in Queensland. But when we have minimum demand, New South Wales are likely to have minimum demand as well. So we can't export our way out of it. So that N-1, round about 2,000 megawatts. So we don't want to go below that. Now there is a little bit of help on its way. So the pump hydros, so Wivenhoe, and then joining us shortly will be Kidston. So and they've got market mechanisms to incentivize them to generate or pump during the day, and that will always help to increase the minimum demand. We've got 2,000 megawatts, 5 gigawatt hours of batteries as well. So they're under either operation or under construction. Now, if they're perfectly orchestrated, they will also help minimum demand. But they're unlikely to be perfectly orchestrated every minimum demand day. And that's why we need that solar backstop mechanism where we can then dial back the rooftop solar to make sure that the system remains stable. So really important that we've got that mechanism because we are without it, it's a bit like the frequency control. So frequency control market, we've got an FCAS market, keeps the frequency at 50 hertz. But we still have under frequency load shedding relays that we test on a regular basis to make sure that when something goes not to plan, that we can actually keep the system stable. Minimum demand is a bit like that. So we've got to make sure that the market mechanisms will be there to make sure the storage are nicely orchestrated and sucking up the free electrons at the appropriate time. But we need to have that equivalent of the under-frequency load shedding, that backstop mechanism, just to make sure that we can keep the system stable when things don't go to plan. Because alternatively, the system becomes unstable and then you get quite large blackouts. So that was the demand side. So now we're going to think about generation. So we've got demand, we're into generation. So as Paul showed in his slides this morning, the pipeline is very, very healthy. Lots of wind, solar, batteries wanting to connect into the network. And as you can see, the red lines is our modeling kind of targets for 2035. So very healthy pipeline there. But you can see a bit of a gap in the gas side, and I've got a slide there for you gas generators later on. So we've got demand, we've got a very healthy generation pipeline, so now we've got to get the network to join the two together. So the first step of that is the renewable energy zones. So we're going to use the economies of scale, the coordination to reduce the impact on landowners and communities, but also provide more cost-effective connections for the generators. So a big focus for us is those renewable energy zones and connecting those renewable generators efficiently as possible. We are taking a very much a market-led approach. First ready, first connect. You don't want zombie projects. We want to make sure those who are ready to go will connect them. And it's a bit like you're developing a shopping centre. We want the Coles and the Woolworths who will come in and provide a solid start to the cost, and then we will then work with the other parties to then connect and make that efficiency. So we're very much taking that market-led, looking for foundation customers. And thank you to all the ones, developers in the room here, who have shared their plans with PowerLink, which has allowed us to then look at the synergies in the various generators, both from a res perspective, but also from a shared network and the 500 kV backbone. And we take those things into account, then what's the best way to connect people? Whether that's through the national ELSI rules or whether it's through the res legislation. I don't care. I'm just looking for the easiest path to connect the megawatts here in Queensland. So that's the renewable energy zone, so we're making good progress in that space. Then it's about the kind of the 500 kV backbone. So our modeling shows that we're seeing flows of about 16 gigawatts for a 12 gigawatt maximum demand network. So you need to have that flows because you're meeting the demand, but also you're charging up the storage, whether it be pump hydro or batteries. So we're seeing far more flows on the network than we've seen before. And when you step back and think about it, we've got to have the network to take it from the solar to the load and to the storage. We've got to have the network to take it from the wind and the storage to the load at night. And then we've got to have the network to take it from the gas turbines to the load when it's not sunny and it's not windy. And that's a far different proposition to a coal power station running at 90% capacity and bringing it to the load. And that's why we need the 500 kV backbone. So this morning you've been talking about the Gladstone project. You saw there's a lot of interest in demand, so a key project for us. The Haleys to Woolooga, so that will allow us to connect the Barumba pump storage, but also provides that connection across the coast and into the inland and further around into the west and south of southeast Queensland. And then we had the central to southern Queensland connection. And in our earlier plans, we thought we'd just put it up the coast, because that's where the majority of our network is, and we thought that makes more sense. But over the last 2 years, engaging with the developers, we've seen a whole raft of generation more inland than along the coast. So we've got 2 gigawatts of wind interest along the coast and 10 gigawatts of interest inland. Now those green dots, so they're the publicly available ones. Rest assured there are many others who have shared their plans with us. So based on that market sounding, based on doing some detailed planning analysis, we've then going to change that central to southern Queensland connection, and we're going to go inland. So that's going to make it easier for those wind generators to connect, reducing costs for generators, but also importantly for Queenslanders. Anybody there looking to connect on the coast, don't worry, I want to connect you as well. We can connect you into the existing 275 kV network, and we can maybe do a couple of enhancements to it as some of that's coming to end of life, so there's opportunities there as well. So I'm keen to connect both the coastal and the inland generation. Ancillary services. So really, really important that we keep the system stable with all these ancillary services. And traditionally, they've been provided by coal power stations, but as they start to ramp down over the next 5 to 10 years, what are we going to use instead? So at this point, I apologize to the electrical engineers in the room as I take some liberties. But if you just think about a nice waveform, 50 hertz, nice sinusoid. So you think about the system strength, protection quality, the fault level. Now that's to do with current. But if you can squint a bit, it's really about thinking about the thickness of that nice waveform, and it needs to be a certain thickness. The next one is system strength for the stable waveform. So you want a nice sinusoidal waveform. So you've got the thickness, and now you've got the nice sinusoid. So we need the system strength to give that nice shape. There's inertia. So inertia, so we want 50 hertz. So we've got to make sure that the frequency is correct. We want to keep it at that 50 hertz, not too low, not too high, just right. So think about the inertia. It's really about that frequency control. And then voltage controls, that's where we use our cap banks and our reactors, and that's really about the magnitude of the waveform. So we've got to make sure that we're managing all of that, the thickness of the waveform, the smoothness of the waveform, the frequency of it, and also the magnitude. And that's what these ancillary services do. So they can be provided by coal power stations. They can also be provided by gas generators with a clutch, pump hydros running in synchronous condenser mode, and also synchronous condensers. Grid-forming batteries can also provide these services, and we're also seeing in Europe they're starting to use these grid-forming STATCOMs. So there are a number of opportunities to provide these services. So PowerLink, we're the system service provider here in Queensland. As of December next year, we're responsible for making sure there's sufficient system strength. So we started our regulatory investment test. We engaged with the market. We got 80 non-network solutions to provide those ancillary and system strength solutions. We published our draft report earlier this month, and so that went live on the website. And we're a raft of non-network solutions, and also up to 9 synchronous condensers by 2034. But what we're seeing is that there are potential more efficient solutions. So we're going to progress with 2 synchronous condensers, but then give time for the generators or the grid-forming batteries to become committed, and then we can actually then put them through the RIT-T and get a better outcome for Queenslanders. So our draft proposal is to engage with the existing pump hydros to make sure they can run in synchronous condenser mode. Engage with existing gas generators and retrofit clutches to them so they can provide system strength when they're not generating. Going to engage with grid-forming batteries, particularly to provide the efficient system strength. But then I'm not sure how much of that type of system strength to enable renewables we're going to need, because by the rules, I can only guarantee that price for up to 5 years. When I talk to developers, they say 5 years is not long enough. We need 10 or 15 years of certainty. So I'm very, very happy to be matchmaker. If you have a renewable generator and you're looking for a grid-forming battery, I'd love to make the introductions. Or if you're a grid-forming battery looking for a renewable generator, I'm happy to do that too. So very keen to help you get the right outcome, do the deal, and provide your own system strength and self-remediate. Talk there about 2 synchronous condensers. So when we look at our portfolio of solutions between synchronous condensers, gas turbines, grid-forming batteries, we see under all the scenarios that we need a couple of synchronous condensers in central Queensland. And then we're just going to maintain that flexibility as other projects become committed. And if they do, then we'll be able to leverage them. If they don't, then we'll have to start installing a few more synchronous condensers. So that's open for feedback. It closes just before Christmas. Would love your feedback. So leveraging the shared network, we will have lots of renewables. We will have the 500 kV backbone. But rest assured, we will want to get as much as we can out of the shared network. And we've got a number of things in place that we're already doing to help squeeze a little bit more out. So a couple of them are in this wide area monitoring and protection and control. So we've already got it in place for one of the cut sets for a double circuit outage to make sure that if we do end up with a double circuit outage, don't happen very often, but if they do, then we'll be able to catch the network within less than 200 milliseconds, keep it stable, and allow us to continue to keep the network going. Another one is in North Queensland, which I'm assured will now be turned on next month. And again, similarly, it was allowing us to run renewables in North Queensland during outages. And then if a fault does happen, then we will quickly ramp the generation down to maintain stability within less than 200 milliseconds. So, and that's different to what's happening across the national electricity market. So normally, you reduce generation in anticipation of a fault happening. What we're doing with these two is we're actually waiting for the fault to happen and then taking very swift action to keep the network stable, allowing us to get more out of the network. High temperature conductor, been looking at that for some of our reses. A 275 kV high temperature res with a little bit of curtailment, you can get 4,500 megawatts of hosting capacity. So that we see as a good sweet spot for connecting renewables. Virtual transmission lines, so with all these grid-forming batteries in southeast Queensland, we'll be able to use them to develop virtual transmission lines and suck more energy into southeast Queensland. And more recently, been looking at how do we leverage the large loads which are coming. So we look at some of those hydrogen loads, very, very large, but also flexible. So how do we use that flexibility to provide a cheaper connection for those loads, but also importantly, keeping the cost down for Queenslanders? So that's just a snippet of some of the ideas the team back at PowerLink are working through. So what does this really mean? So I thought I'd have a few slides on guiding the market. Now, I'm not smarter than the market. In fact, I'm looking at some of the modeling we did. It was showing I needed about 3 gig of batteries by 2032. We've now got 2 gigawatts under construction. So we're not smarter than the market. But here's just a few things to keep in mind when you're doing your generation development. So load centers. Transmission 101. Put your generation close to the load or close to where the new load is going to be. So that reduces the amount of transmission that's required to build, and we're very busy, so we need to be as efficient as we can. And your marginal loss factors will provide you the guidance there. So think about your marginal loss factors for the existing load, but also some of that new load is coming as well. So you'll be able to take those things into account. But yep, transmission 101, generation close to load. Pump hydros. So we're seeing a lot of interest in pump hydros across Queensland. So these are the ones in the public domain. And the pump hydros, when you think about it, are new loads. And with solar being the cheapest form of electrons you can get, and solar across Queensland being pretty homogeneous, then from a transmission perspective, it makes a lot of sense to put your large-scale solar next to the pump hydros. So again, guiding the market, my preference, put your large-scale solar next to the pump hydros. Wind. So wind, there's less flexibility. You have to build the wind generators where it's windy. And that's where that conversation and sharing your information with us is part of the renewable energy zones. So we can then inform how do we upgrade our shared network and also the 500 kV backbone. So thank you very much for those who have shared your plans. And if you haven't, I would just encourage you to do so, very much on a confidential basis. But it then really does help guide how we develop the network and then help support the connection of wind, and the inland central Queensland, southern Queensland is a good example of that. Gas generation. Gas is good. Essential for firming, keeping the lights on when it's not sunny and not windy. So you can see a lot of gas generation down there in southern Queensland. So now gas generation, great for firming. It can also provide, with a clutch, system strength, all those ancillary services. So again, when I look at it from a selfish transmission perspective, central Queensland looks like a wonderful place to put a gas turbine and a clutch. So a big sign, gas turbine, central Queensland, bring clutch. Make me a very happy person. Batteries. So batteries, are pretty easy to locate in various parts. So seeing a lot of interest in southern Queensland at the moment. So a battery's close to the load. It can help with virtual transmission. It can help with voltage support. A battery close to generation can help you self-remediate your system strength. So it really put your battery wherever you would like your services. I'm looking there going, oh, maybe central and northern Queensland would be a good spot to pop some batteries. But remember, when is the pool price highest? During evening. You do not want your nice shiny battery to be constrained at the time when the prices are high. So that would tend to say that you would put your battery close to the load, and then you would trickle charge it during the day. If it's constrained during the day, the price is going to be a bit less anyway, so you'll be less sad, but you don't want to be sad in the evening peak and your battery being constrained. So from that perspective, being closer to the load might make more sense. Dynamic voltage support. You can't have a technical tapper discussion without a dynamic voltage support slide. So we need a lot of dynamic voltage support for our long and stringy network. And if you look at it on a per megawatt basis, we have more dynamic voltage support devices than any other network. And you can see them all dotted up the coast. However, if you look closely, there's not many in central Queensland. Why is that? So that's where the coal generators are, and the coal generators can provide that dynamic voltage support. But what's going to happen when those coal power stations start to mothball and wind back? We're going to need some more dynamic voltage support in that area. So renewables, so your solar, wind, batteries, they can all provide that dynamic voltage support. So there might be an opportunity for you in central Queensland. So my job is not done. We have much to do in the energy transformation, and I look forward to working with you to get the right outcome for Queenslanders. Right, some questions. And I've just looked at my watch and gone, I've gone over. So, what have we got? There'll be microphones out there. If you just put your hand up. Oh, hello, John. Wait for the microphone. Wait for the microphone. They're coming. They're coming.
John O'Brien again. Stuart, always good material. But one of the interesting things, you talk about we put the generation near the loads. And I think there's a nuance on that we need to be careful about. We used to do that because the cost of a loss from losses on the line from gas or from coal is very high. So marginal cost of a megawatt hour out of a coal-fired power station, let's say it's $65. The marginal cost out of renewables is zero. And therefore, our strategy needs to take into account the cost that we talked about this morning, the cost on the community of putting generation where there is a lot of people, or where there is agriculture, or where there is environmental areas, and take that into account when we talk about where do we put the transmission to facilitate the generation that we want.
Yep, definitely, John. It's a balance, as with all these things, it's a trade-off. From my selfish perspective, saying, well, I don't really want to build any more transmission than I have to, then having them in close. But if you can't build close to where the load centres are, and then you have to bring the transmission, you have to build a bit further out, and I'm thinking of Hughenden as a good example, then yep, that's what we'll have to do. Just be very careful with your marginal loss factors in the interim. Online. So Jennifer Brownie, does PowerLink use the same commitment criteria as AEMO for the status of proposed generation and storage projects, in particular for anticipated and committed? So when I was talking about the regulatory investment test, there's guidance under the rules and what you provide, or what we can take as a committed project. And we've been looking at that very, very carefully and seeing how can we make sure that we're getting the right outcome for Queenslanders. So through the regulatory investment test is where we're looking at that committed projects and testing that criteria. AEMO certainly in Queensland, don't do regulatory investment tests. They may do some in Victoria through the Victorian planning arm, and again they will be using the same criteria under the rules. Oh, I've got a hand over there.
Heidi Edmonds from think tank Beyond Zero Emissions. We've been focusing on Gladstone with our Renewable Energy Industrial Precinct program. So we have been looking at some of those potential future large energy loads. And I'm wondering, when you're doing your modelling, if you are considering some of those future large loads, when you think about where your transmission lines are going and whether you might need future larger easements. Just obviously it's indicative, but there's a lot of potential there.
Yes, definitely. So one of the reasons we're building that Calvell to Clypea River line is to enable the decarbonisation, both some new load, but also to enable Gladstone Power Station to wind back as well. The feeder up the coast provides a bit more flexibility, and that's a single circuit which we're looking to build as a double circuit and really increase the capacity, giving us flexibility. So as we get to those investment decisions, we'll be very cognizant of what the demand forecast could be in the variations, and then look at the most appropriate way to progress. I think I might be running out. Am I running out of time? Yep, we're getting close. I'm waiting for the 5-minute sign, but I can't actually see anything because of the bright lights. So yes, excellent. I will thank you. Oh, one more.
Hi, Iyas here from Train Solar. I think you mentioned about the system strength contracts to be extended from 5 years to like 10 or more. So, but some of the documents we are seeing from PowerLink, like PADA, they are mentioning about the conditions to terminate these contracts earlier. So, just want to know, like, what's your plan to extend from 5 to 10 or 15 years?
Right. So a couple of parts to that. So the one is, if a party is looking to buy system strength services from PowerLink, under the rules, we can only provide a fixed price for the maximum of 5 years. After that, then we do our system strength unit price update every 5 years, and then that's the price that the developers have to pay. Feedback we get from developers is they can't bank that uncertainty, because I can't say what my system strength unit price is going to be in 5 years' time. So hence, we're seeing a lot of people looking to self-remediate. The other part of that question could be about when PowerLink's engaging for a system strength solution, how long will we contract that for? So we'll look to do that over maybe a 5 or a 10-year period to make sure that we're enabling the investment required to get a low price for a solution to get the right outcome for Queenslanders. And that might be different in different parts of the network, depending on the portfolio of solutions that we have available. Right, I think I'm being told to bring that to an end. So thank you very much for this afternoon, and enjoy your Friday afternoon.